In the 1850s, 4 miles from York, Western Australia, were a group of 4 houses. Auburn, on the west bank of the Avon River, was the home of Captain Mears. On the opposite bank, to the southeast of Auburn, was Hawkhurst, the property of George Mears. South of Hawkhurst was the Hoops residence, called Woodlands. North of Hawkhurst was a family named Stoner. Auburn and Hawkhurst were connected via a ford. Early on the morning of Sunday the 20th of August 1854, a 40-year-old carpenter who worked for George Mears at Hawkhurst, named Ah Chong, was noticed to be missing. 2 Chinese men had arrived in the district about July 1854. Captain Mears engaged Ah Mong as a cook, and at the same time George Mears employed Ah Chong, the carpenter. Western Australia was at that time a convict colony, and working at Auburn were 2 ticket of leave men. A ticket of leave was a form of parole which meant the men were still convicts, but lived and worked away from a prison. They were free to marry and acquire property, but forbidden from leaving the colony or bearing firearms. The ticket was a document which they carried on their person at all times. The men at Auburn were Edward Bishop and William Voss. Bishop was described as quiet, slow-thinking, but a good worker, kind and friendly. Voss was said to be ordinary, with no outstanding traits. The pair slept together in a hut 60 yards from Captain Mears' house, until the arrival of the Chinese pair. For some reason the carpenter was adamant that he would not sleep alone, so Bishop was told to sleep in the same room at Hawkhurst with Ah Chong. It appears the 2 men did not get along. Bishop disliked Ah Chong, and made comments that he was favoured with bits of food from the kitchen by Ah Mong. In turn, Ah Chong complained that Bishop was often drunk and stole things. At one point Bishop was heard to exclaim that he would one day throw all the Chinaman's bloody things into the river. On the night of the 19th of August, Bishop and Ah Chong were at Stoner's house, where they drank some liquor, and when they left to walk home, Bishop was drunk. The 2 men went to bed and woke early the next day. Ah Chong went to go to the river, and Bishop to attend to the horses. It was the last time that Ah Chong was seen alive. Even though screams and cries had been heard at sunrise near the Avon River, it was thought they were made by an indigenous woman, so no search was made for the Chinese carpenter until midday. An indigenous man named Tubin, but known to the Europeans as Jamie, who worked for Captain Mears, saw Bishop near a sundial, having apparently come from the direction of the river. Jamie had heard the noises, but Bishop said it was a curious noise, probably some drunken men. The rim of Bishop's straw hat was torn, and Jamie thought he looked pale. Bishop remained with Jamie the rest of the day, going to Voss's hut at about 6:30 a.m. Bishop borrowed a pipe to smoke with from Voss, and he and Jamie rested there. Although it was still early in the day, Bishop changed his shirt. At some point he promised to give Jamie some clothes. Mr. Hoop's cook, Charles Claydon, came in during breakfast and remarked he had heard a terrible noise that morning. Voss, although his hut was nearer the river, said he had heard nothing. The 3 men later went to visit the Stoners, and then went to Hawkhurst to feed the horses. There was no sign of Ah Chong, and no fire burning in the kitchen, to which Bishop displayed no surprise. Voss surmised that Ah Chong had departed. Ah Chong's brother Ah Mong went looking for him, and found a tin bucket floating on the water, and was seen on the bank by Bishop and Jamie crying. When they asked Ah Mong why he was upset, he said he feared his brother had drowned. At about 3 p.m, Voss pointed out signs that somebody had slipped down the bank, and it was feared that the missing man had accidentally fallen in the water. There was also blood on the bank of the river, in 2 places. Shortly afterwards, the body of Ah Chong was discovered amongst trees in the water by Voss and Stoner, and pulled from the water by these men, with help from Bishop and Mears. It was evident that he had not drowned. He had been beaten about the head with what appeared to be an axe. There were cuts and bruises on the cheek, across the mouth, the back of the neck, and the forehead. A purse with a small amount of money in it, which the man wore tied to his clothing with a piece of cord, was missing. Whoever had slipped on the river bank was barefoot, but the body was wearing one shoe, and the other shoe was floating in the water. Although the spot could be seen from nearby houses, trees obscured the view of anything happening there. For the next 3 or 4 nights, Bishop and Jamie slept in the same bed at the hut with Voss. Jamie asked Bishop if he had killed the Chinaman, to to which Bishop responded by laughing. On the 21st of August, an axe was discovered in the room where Ah Chong and Bishop had slept. There were bloody fingerprints on the handle, although the blade had been washed clean. Bishop realised that local suspicion had fallen on him. He was conversing with a man named Martin at York the following Sunday, the 27th, and asked, "Martin, if you were to kill a man and no man saw you do it, would you be hanged?" When Martin said no, Bishop replied, "Then I don't care a straw for them." On the following Friday, another local man, George Wall, said, "Well, Bishop, they haven't hung you yet." Bishop responded, "No, they must first prove me guilty before they hang me." But with no evidence to solve the murder, the authorities chose to offer a reward of £100, a fortune in those days, for information. Locals began to cast accusations at Bishop, remembering how he and Ah Chong had quarrelled with each other. Jamie, no doubt influenced by the reward, suddenly recalled that Bishop's shirt had a blood stain on it. About 2 weeks after the murder of Ah Chong, the police arrested Edward Bishop on suspicion of murder. It was claimed that traces of blood were found on his hat and jacket. After a 4-hour trial in Perth on the 4th of October, where an impassive Bishop defended himself and declared he was innocent and knew nothing about the death of Ah Chong, he was found guilty in 20 minutes by the jury and sentenced to death. He was to hang on the 12th of October, 1854. Before his execution, Bishop wrote a brief autobiography and his version of the events of the day that had led him to the gallows. "I was born at Kingston Seymour, near Bristol, on the 14th of June 1831. My father is a farm labourer, my mother is dead, and I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers. I was never sent to any day school, nor attended any Sunday school. Occasionally went to church or chapel. I am a miner in the iron mines, and was sent to work in them at 8 years of age. I was tried at the Hereford Assizes in July 1849 for burglary, and sentenced to 10 years transportation. I had no intention of committing housebreaking, but went in with a companion out of the rain. My companion left me. I was sent from Hereford Gaol to Pentonville, where I remained about 15 months, and there I learned to write. I was then sent to Portland Prison, where I remained 22 months, and was then sent on board the Dudbrook for Western Australia. She sailed the 21st of November 1852, and arrived 7th of February 1853. I had a ticket of leave given me as soon as I landed. I worked for some time in the North Fremantle depot, after which I went to York depot, where I remained about 6 weeks, and the rest of the time I lived with Captain Mears. On the morning of the murder, I got up about daylight. I then went out and fed the horses, and then went over to Captain Mears' house. I met no one on the way. I remained there till I had my breakfast. I left the Chinaman in bed when I got up in the morning, and saw him no more, till I helped to take him out of the water. I was in Stoner's house the previous night, with a man named Voss, and we had a bottle of rum. It was late when I left. There were 5 present to drink the rum. I went immediately to bed and slept soundly. Jamie's evidence was wrong. I most solemnly assert, in the presence of God, that I did not commit the murder, and had no hand in it, and know not how the man met with his death. I assert this in the prospect of death, and do it as if it were done in the presence of God. The contents of a letter which Bishop wrote to his friends was revealed publicly. My dear father, brothers, and sisters, I send my kind love to you all, for the last time, until we meet above, and I hope we shall all meet in the glory of the Lord, for I have to die for a crime that I do not know nothing all about. So, dear father, no more at present. Edward Bishop. There was no doubt in most minds as to his guilt, and it was marvelled at that he clung to his claim of innocence right up to the end, and the fatalism with which he seemed to accept his plight. On the 12th of October, Bishop was conveyed in a cart from Perth Gaol on St George's Terrace, where Perth Museum is now situated. The bells of St George's tolled as soldiers of the 99th Regiment marched ahead, followed by 3 carts. In the first was the sheriff and the chaplain, Bishop in the second, and his coffin was in the 3rd cart. Mounted police rode alongside the 2nd cart. He was taken down St George's and Adelaide Terraces, across the causeway over the Swan River, and to a spot on the Fremantle Road, where the suburb of South Perth is today, where a tall jarrah tree grew. Near today's Elm Street is a plaque which marks the spot. However, old-timers in the 1930s believe this is wrong, and that the tree was a third of a mile further on, near today's Banksia Terrace. In the 1930s, the stump of a huge tree could still be seen. It had been cut down after a mailman rode into the trunk on his horse, killing both of them. Here the grim procession ended, and Bishop was asked a final time to confess his guilt. "I assert in the presence of God," he replied with his hand raised to heaven, "that I did not commit the murder. I die for a crime I know nothing about, and I do not fear death." A rope was thrown around the limb of the giant tree, and the cart he stood in moved on. Edward Bishop, aged 23, fell and was hanged with barely a struggle. Around 1857, Bishop's mate, William Voss, confessed that he, not Bishop, had killed Ah Chong, but if it was believed, nothing was done about it, for after all the case had been solved and the ultimate penalty extracted. Edward Bishop's hanging was beginning to fade from memory when on the 11th of November 1861 Mary Moyer was murdered in the same area as Ah Chong. Her husband, a shepherd employed by Seymour Mears, son of Captain Mears, reported his wife missing that day. Mears and a couple of his employees helped search until late into the night, but found no trace of her. Her husband was adamant that she would not have left, and only one set of her clothes was missing. He suggested maybe she had been bitten by a snake. The next day a police search was instigated, including an Aboriginal tracker. The body of Mary was located under a large gum tree in a wheat field not far from her hut. She had been hacked around the head with a tomahawk, just like Ah Chong had been. The ground was saturated with her blood. In her hand she clutched some hairs, and the mark of a boot had been kicked into her arm. The tracker found a man's footsteps and followed them. It could be seen that the man was wearing boots which had the sole affixed with a mixture of small and large-headed nails. Back at the Mears station, 3 tomahawks had been found. 2 were dirty and 1 freshly cleaned. A pair of men's trousers had been washed and were hanging up to dry. Mary's husband was told his wife had been found. He asked, "Is she dead?" When told she was, he cried out and dropped to the ground and wailed and asked where she was. Despite his display of emotion, he was not seen to shed a single tear, and somebody noticed that his boots had a mix of small and large nails on them, corresponding to the trail which had been followed. One of the boots was also later found to match the bruise on her arm. The hairs in the dead woman's hand matched the same man. Her common-law husband was arrested for her murder. His name was William Voss. At his trial it was noted that Voss was a violent man. He had once kicked a sheep so hard during shearing that it burst its entrails and the animal had to be killed. Voss was sentenced to death on the 27th of December 1861 and executed at Perth Jail on the 10th of January 1862. Like Bishop, he protested to the end that he was innocent and blamed Indigenous people for the killing. It appears, though, that Edward Bishop was an innocent man. If he suspected Voss was the one who had killed Ah Chong, then presumably he kept quiet out of loyalty to his